They came in khakis and clipboards, their smiles stretched tight like stretched vinyl patio chairs. The kind of smiles that said, "Bless your heart," but meant, "You're the problem." It was the first time the HOA board visited my property, not out of curiosity or concern, but with the quiet arrogance of people who believed they had jurisdiction over history, just because they had a majority vote and matching polos. I knew why they were there the moment I saw them pointing. They stood at the edge of my land, looking down at the dam, my family's dam. 106 years old, to be exact. My great-grandfather had engineered it by hand, with local labor and mule carts, long before the town above it had even gotten a name. It wasn't just a structure. It was a promise. It held back floodwaters every spring, quietly protecting the valley, the orchards, the roads, and yes, the very homes of the same people now calling it an unsightly liability. They didn't ask permission to walk onto my land. They didn't introduce themselves with anything more than, "We're from the HOA board just doing a quick survey." Survey. As if this was an abandoned junkyard and not the beating heart of a watershed system that fed the entire region. The man in the front, Roger Carlisle, HOA president and self-proclaimed urban design hobbyist, squinted at the dam like it personally offended his sense of aesthetics. "Doesn't really match the rest of the neighborhood, does it?" he said. To no one in particular, then turned to me. "You've got something very rustic here. Ever thought about modernizing?" I almost laughed. But then I realized he wasn't joking. He was serious, dead serious. "This dam predates your HOA, your subdivision, and your backyard fire pits," I replied, trying to keep my tone level. "It was designed by a civil engineer and has prevented over 24 floods since 1917. It's protected all of you more than you'll ever know." Roger blinked, clearly annoyed that I didn't swoon under the weight of his clipboard authority. A woman beside him, Karen. Yes, her real name, made a face like she'd stepped in something. Still, she said, her voice lilting, "It's not exactly scenic. Our community is aiming for a more cohesive look. The stonework is very fortress-like." "It is a fortress," I said. "That's the point." I remember how Roger tapped his pen against the edge of his clipboard, already disengaging from the conversation. "Well, he said we'll take this under advisement. You'll hear from us." And just like that, they walked off, as if my land, my history, my rights were items to be discussed in a meeting with bad coffee and worse lighting. I should have known then. That look in Roger's eyes, it wasn't curiosity, it was conquest. That night, I found a flyer taped to my mailbox. Community Beautification Initiative preserving aesthetic harmony across all shared spaces. My land wasn't shared. My dam wasn't theirs. But that word, initiative, rang in my ears like a warning bell. The next week, they began canvassing. I'd hear whispers at the local farmer's market. "Have you seen that dam? It's so old. I heard it's not even up to code. Why does he get to control the water like that?" It was working. The HOA was poisoning the well literally and figuratively. And it didn't matter that I had all the paperwork proving my sole ownership of the land, the structure, and the surrounding watershed. When enough people start repeating a lie, the truth starts to sound like treason. At the next HOA meeting, which I attended out of morbid curiosity, they unveiled a new beautification plan. Right there on a projector screen was a mock-up of a community park, slides, picnic tables, a walking trail, right where my dam stood. "Pending approval," Roger said with that same polished smirk, "we believe this space can become a unifying centerpiece for the entire neighborhood. A place for families to gather. Safer too, we've received multiple concerns about the age and integrity of the current structure." I raised my hand. I was the only one in the room not wearing name tags and neutral tones. "Have any engineers evaluated the dam? Have you reviewed the hydrology reports? That dam is the only thing keeping this town dry when spring melt comes." Karen smiled with the patience of a kindergarten teacher. "We're not trying to upset anyone, Mr. Grant," I said. "Miles Grant. My family built the dam." "Well, Mr. Grant," she continued, "we believe it's time the community came together to reimagine what this space could be." My voice stayed calm, but I could feel the fury rising behind my ribs. "You're reimagining a death trap. Remove that dam, and you're begging for a flood." Someone scoffed. A man in a blue windbreaker murmured something about doomsday types. I walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. That night, I stayed up reviewing documents, ownership records, flood maps, water flow, charts, letters from the county from as far back as the 60s. I made copies. I labeled everything. I built a binder so thick it could break a coffee table. Because deep down I knew this wasn't over. They hadn't even begun to fight fair yet. My daughter once asked me why I never left this place. Not when Mom died. Not when the farm failed. Not when the neighbors stopped waving at us like they used to. She was 13 eyes full of fire voice, laced with that familiar blend of grief and impatience only a teenager can master. I told her the truth. Because your grandfather died right there, under that sky fixing the spillway after a storm. Because his father laid every stone in that dam by hand. Because leaving it behind would feel like abandoning their hands, their sweat, their stories. She didn't understand then. I didn't expect her to. But that's the thing about legacy. It doesn't always shine. Sometimes it rusts, erodes, gets covered in algae. It's not always pretty. But it holds. The HOA didn't care about that. To them, the dam was just a nuisance, a visual inconsistency, a liability that wasn't aesthetically aligned with the community vision. Their exact words. I kept the letter. It came 2 weeks after the meeting, typed on faux parchment paper with a gold HOA seal at the top, like it was some medieval decree. They'd voted unanimously to petition the city for the removal of the non-permitted dam structure located at Parcel 117B. That was my land. They didn't even use my name. They were clever. They didn't come at me directly. Instead, they started whispering to the city zoning office about unauthorized modifications to public water sources. They filed nuisance complaints. They tried to push ordinances redefining natural water flow rights under the guise of environmental regulation. But what they didn't know, or had underestimated, was that I'd been fighting this kind of bureaucratic sabotage since before most of them had graduated high school. I spent a decade in the Army Corps of Engineers. I'd seen what happened when pencil pushers thought they knew better than riverbeds. I'd seen villages drown because someone moved a levee 5 feet. My father taught me that water remembers, always. It remembers the path it used to take. It waits. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew a legal fight was coming, and I knew I couldn't rely on nostalgia alone to win it. So I gathered everything. Blueprints from 1917 with my great-grandfather's signature in the corner. Maintenance logs my dad kept in a shoebox, detailing every storm, every repair, every inspection he'd ever done. Photos of the dam over the decades, black and white ones, where it looked like a fortress of stone against the trees, color ones with me, as a boy, legs swinging over the edge, while Dad taught me how to listen for cracks. I even had letters, real letters from the county dated back to 1953, thanking my family for the ongoing stewardship of critical flood infrastructure. All of it went into the binder. I copied it 5 times. One copy went to my lawyer, a bulldog of a woman named Ruthie Delgado, who knew land law like preachers know scripture. Another went to the county commissioner's office. A third I dropped by hand at the HOA headquarters. I made sure to slide it under Roger's office door myself. I knew it wouldn't stop them, but it would slow them. Or so I thought. 2 days later, I came home from the grocery store to find 4 men in neon vests standing by the dam with measuring wheels and drones. I parked the truck so hard it skidded gravel. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I asked, slamming the door behind me. One of them, a wiry guy with a beard like a broomhead, said, "Surveying for the park project, sir." He called me sir like it was a joke. "This is private property," I said. "You're trespassing." "We were told it was common use green space," he replied without missing a beat. "HOA authorization." I looked past them, saw the survey flags, the pink ribbons tied to trees like warnings. "You need to leave, now." He shrugged. "We've got our data. We're done anyway." They left, but not before one of them took a slow panoramic video with his phone. It made my skin crawl. That night, I went through the HOA bylaws again. I highlighted every clause about property rights, about jurisdiction boundaries, about easement lines. I didn't sleep. I just read and reread and built a new binder. By the time dawn broke, I had what I needed, proof that the dam and the acre of land around it fell fully, legally, and irrevocably outside of HOA governance. Ruthie filed a cease and desist the same morning. But it wasn't just legal, it was personal now. And that's where they made their mistake. Because you can bully a man. You can lie about him. You can even try to erase his history. But when you come after his father's legacy, You better be ready to drown in the truth. I walked the dam that morning, hand on the stone, feeling its age. It hummed with memory. I could hear my father's voice explaining hydraulic head pressure. Could hear his laugh when I fell in the spillway trying to catch a frog. Could smell the sun-baked mud and old pine boards. And for the first time since the HOA started their war, I didn't feel fear. I felt focus. They thought they could bulldoze history. But history, real history, has roots deeper than paperwork. And it was about to rise. It arrived folded in half and sealed with one of those plastic window envelopes that make you feel like whatever's inside is already final. No stamp. Just a barcode, and the HOA's emblem, that ridiculous oak leaf crest they slapped on everything from newsletters to dog poop bag dispensers at the park. I'd been expecting a response from Ruthie's cease and desist filing. Maybe even a formal apology, if there was any decency left in their bones. But this wasn't an apology. It was a declaration. Dear Mr. Grant, it began not Miles, not property owner, not even land steward, just Mr. Grant. The formality already dripping with disdain. It continued. Following a unanimous board decision, and in accordance with Section 14.3 of the Neighborhood Environmental Aesthetic Charter, the HOA will proceed with the removal of the unauthorized and hazardous dam structure located within visual proximity of common recreational space. Demolition and landscape restoration will begin within 10 business days. I read that sentence 5 times. The words unauthorized and hazardous hit me like a slap. They weren't just overstepping, they were rewriting the entire narrative. They were making me the villain. The back of the letter included a bullet-pointed timeline complete with permit self-issued contractor names, all HOA aligned, and a cheery rendering of the future Lakeview Meadows Community Park. The dam wasn't in the drawing. Just a flat stretch of manicured grass, some ducks, and pastel-colored children flying kites. Like history had never stood there. I folded the letter slowly, carefully, as if crushing it too quickly would confirm its power. Then I walked out back to the dam. The sky was clear, but I could feel a storm coming, not in the air, but in my bones. That sixth sense soldiers get when something's been set in motion and can't be stopped. The dam looked the same as ever. Massive, silent, steady. The spillway hummed with a soft trickle, the moss along the eastern face catching the morning light. You wouldn't know by looking that it had survived over a century of storms, floods, and small-town politics. But it might not survive 10 more days. I called Ruthie. I didn't even say hello. They set a demolition date. I could hear her flipping pages through the phone. They're bluffing, she said. They can't execute a demolition without city authorization, and they sure as hell can't touch a structure with registered historical documentation. We submitted that packet 3 days ago. They didn't wait. There was a pause. I knew she was clenching her jaw. I'd seen it before in court, that silent fury that made her terrifying in a deposition. All right, she said finally. We escalate. Injunction emergency hearing. If they lay so much as a finger on that stone, I'll have them in court before the dust settles. But legal processes take time, even emergency ones. And HOA boards, they thrive on moving just fast enough to outpace accountability. The next day, the orange stakes appeared. They weren't subtle. Neon plastic poles stabbed into the ground like insults lining the perimeter of the dam, with flags labeled Remove, Grade, and Clear. There was even a hand-painted wooden sign posted on my front fence. Coming soon, community green space. Complete with balloons crudely painted next to a smiling sun. I ripped it off with both hands and shattered it across my porch rail. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by documents, maps, and photos. My daughter came down around midnight, rubbing her eyes, wearing one of her mother's old t-shirts that hung off her like a blanket. Dad, she said, why do they care so much about a dam? I looked at her. At her face so much like her mother's, it ached. I couldn't lie to her, not now. Because they don't understand it, I said. And people like that, they destroy what they don't understand. She sat beside me, rested her head on my arm. They can't just take it, she whispered. I kissed the top of her head. No, I said, but they can try. 2 days later, I saw the excavator. A bright yellow beast parked across the road next to the HOA's maintenance shed. Its arm loomed like a threat, the bucket teeth already rusted from other jobs. A stack of gravel rebar and silt fencing sat beside it. There was no mistaking the message. They were ready. I started calling every news station within a 100-mile radius. Most didn't answer. A few transferred me, then hung up. One reporter, a young guy from the local college radio, agreed to meet me and take photos. He said it sounded like a cool David versus Goliath thing. It was better than nothing. That same day, Ruthie called with some hope. "I got us a hearing," she said, 3 days from now. "Injunctions going before a judge. If we win, they'll have to halt all work until ownership is resolved." I felt something tighten and release in my chest. 3 days. All we had to do was hold the line for 3 days. But I'd been in war zones. I knew what people could do in 72 hours when they thought they were above the rules. That evening, I walked the length of the dam again, took photos, measured stone blocks, recorded video testimony. I spoke directly to the camera like I was speaking to my father. This dam kept your town alive. It stood longer than any of your fences, your bylaws, your landscaping preferences. This isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who ever tried to protect something worth keeping. I saved the file, made 3 backups, because something inside me said they're not going to wait for a judge. They're going to come before that, and I needed to be ready. The next morning, I drove to City Hall with 3 copies of my documentation tucked into a manila folder, and hope gritted between my teeth. I wasn't dressed for war, but I wore my old army boots anyway, not out of symbolism, just because they never failed me. The leather was cracked, the laces a bit frayed, but the soles had carried me through mud, sand, and now bureaucracy. I had an 8:15 appointment with a man named Thomas Kellerman, Assistant Director of Infrastructure Oversight, a title long enough to sound important, but vague enough to mean nothing. His office was on the 3rd floor, a beige cube in a building made entirely of dusty brick and flickering fluorescent lights. A receptionist pointed me in his direction with a sigh, like she'd seen one too many people walk in hopeful and limp out, defeated. "Mr. Grant," he said when I knocked, pronouncing it like a formality rather than a greeting. "Come in." Thomas Kellerman looked like the kind of man who never quite removed his tie, even at home. Wire-rimmed glasses, thin-pursed lips, and the haunted look of someone who had once dreamed of doing good, but now mostly dealt with mulch delivery permits and road salt budgets. "I know why you're here," he said before I even sat down. "Then I hope you know it's urgent." He offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's the problem, Mr. Grant. It always is." I placed the folder on his desk, opening it like a lawyer presenting evidence. Inside were annotated photographs of the dam blueprints signed in 1916 city letters from the 60s, acknowledging its role in flood prevention, even my father's handwritten flood mitigation notes from a 1983 spring thaw that nearly wiped out the southern slope of the town. Thomas skimmed the pages with the careful apathy of a man trained to not react too quickly. "I understand your concern," he said finally. "But the demolition, as I understand it, was petitioned under the Neighborhood Environmental Aesthetic Charter. The HOA filed the paperwork months ago. No objections were raised until very recently. Because I wasn't notified, I snapped. That's the point. They buried it in closed meetings and then claimed my property as shared space. That dam sits on deeded land my family has held for 3 generations." He looked at me for a long second, then leaned back in his chair. "Off the record?" he asked. I nodded. "They've got friends in planning and zoning, and on the Historic Review Board too. Roger Carlisle, the HOA president. His sister-in-law sits on the Beautification Council. This park project, it's not about safety and it's not about community. It's about legacy. His legacy. They want his name on the dedication plaque. They want a ribbon cutting next spring." I exhaled slowly, my fists clenched beneath the table. "They'll be cutting that ribbon underwater," I said. "That dam isn't decorative. It's essential. You pull it, you flood the valley. This isn't guesswork. It's math. It's physics." Thomas looked away. "Then stop them, in court. We're trying. We have a hearing scheduled. But if they start early," he held up a hand, "then you document everything. Call the press. Call the city engineer's office. Get a geotech out there. The second they touch your property without legal clearance, they're in violation. But until a judge says otherwise..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I left his office with no illusions. They weren't going to wait. That evening, I stood at the edge of the dam as the sun dropped behind the ridge, casting the valley in gold. The air smelled like pine and fresh silt. The water level was low steady. But the clouds forming on the horizon carried a blue-gray bruising I recognized too well. Storm weather, maybe 2 days out, maybe 3. If the dam was compromised before then, I picked up the phone and called the last person I ever wanted to. His name was Ed Matheson. Used to be my father's best friend until they fell out over a failed business venture back in the 90s. Ed owned a grading company now, a small one. Did back roads and drainage projects for the county. Ed, I said after the third ring. Long pause. Miles, I need a favor. Another pause. Has hell frozen over? I didn't laugh. I need eyes on the dam. Real ones. I don't trust the HOA's contractors. I want a soil report and a structural opinion. You know the ground here. You know what it holds. You expecting sabotage. I'm expecting stupidity, which is worse. Ed exhaled through his nose like he was chewing on it. I'll send a guy tomorrow morning. At dawn, I watched as Ed's man, a quiet guy named Theo in mud-streaked Carhartts, pounded rebar into the bank and ran a laser level across the crest of the dam. He jotted notes, took photos, even ran a compacting test on the eastern face. After 3 hours, he nodded once and handed me a clipboard. You're good, he said. Real good. A little erosion on the north edge, but nothing unstable. This thing could hold for another 50 years. He paused, assuming no one pokes holes in it. I thanked him, paid him cash, then scanned every page of the report into my computer, sent copies to Ruthie to City Hall, and because I knew it would needle them, to the HOA's general inbox. No response. That night, I installed trail cameras around the perimeter. Infrared, motion-sensitive, waterproof. If they were going to sneak in early, I'd catch them. But the next morning, it wasn't trespassers that woke me. It was the sound of heavy machinery. I was in the kitchen pouring coffee when the rumble hit deep low mechanical. I ran to the front porch, barefoot cups sloshing in my hand, and saw a bulldozer rolling down the street, escorted by a convoy of pickup trucks with orange flags. They didn't stop at the HOA maintenance shed. They kept coming, straight toward my gate. I ran to intercept them, heart thudding so hard it drowned out the engine. You have no right, I shouted, waving them down. This is private land. One of the men, a contractor I didn't recognize, leaned out the window. We were told this section falls under the HOA's improvement zone. Improvement, I barked. What exactly are you improving? The floodplain you're about to turn into a lake. He shrugged. I just moved dirt, man. I turned to the other drivers shouting, warning, demanding. A few looked uneasy. One checked his phone. Another frowned when I said the word injunction. But the lead truck didn't slow down. And when I heard the backup alarm chirp, that mechanical beep, beep, beep of something being positioned for demolition, I knew I had minutes left. So I did the only thing I could. I stepped in front of the bulldozer, coffee still in hand. The driver honked, revved the engine, but I didn't move. Because my father built this dam. Because my daughter still believed in me. Because if I let them take it without a fight, I'd be erasing more than just stone. I'd be erasing everything we'd ever stood for. The air was thick with diesel and defiance. I stood motionless in front of the bulldozer, my feet planted on gravel, like they were sunk in concrete. And I swear I could feel the ground humming beneath me, not from the machine, but from the weight of history. My coffee had gone cold in my hand, but I didn't care. That cup was the last bit of calm I'd have that day. The driver killed the engine finally, but didn't step out. Instead, one of the HOA's hired security detail approached from the rear convoy. He wore a neon vest, sunglasses, too big for his face, and a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt like he was directing traffic instead of enforcing an unlawful demolition. Sir, he said, not bothering to look me in the eye, I need you to clear the work zone. This isn't a work zone, I said, it's my land. He pointed to a clipboard. According to our site plan, I didn't let him finish. You're trespassing. Every one of you. There's no court order. There's no city permit. There's no jurisdiction. If you so much as scratch a single stone, I'll have you and every person in your chain of command in court before sundown. He shifted uneasily. Sir, I'm going to have to ask. I don't answer to you. That's when I saw her. Karen, the same Karen. From the first inspection, the one who sneered at the dam and called it fortress-like was standing off to the side, in a white HOA-branded windbreaker, arms folded, lips pursed, like she was watching someone fail to rake their leaves properly. Miles, she called, don't make this harder than it has to be. I turned slow and deliberate. You already made it hard when you decided this town's history wasn't worth preserving. When you lied to your neighbors. When you made a park plan that benefits your friends and called it community progress. We followed procedure, she said. No, you manufactured it. Behind her, I saw Roger Carlyle step out of a black Escalade. He looked like a man who'd already mentally drafted his next press release. Calm, smooth, smug. Like he was the hero of this story. He approached with his hands raised in mock surrender. Miles, nobody wants a fight. This is a beautification project. We're building a space everyone can enjoy. I stared at him. You're about to flood the town. He chuckled. That dam hasn't been properly inspected in decades. Frankly, it's a hazard. And it sits on disputed land. There is no dispute, I snapped. The deed's recorded in the county office. You think I haven't done my homework? Roger nodded toward the bulldozer. I think you're holding up progress, and I think you're going to regret it. I stepped closer nose to nose. So push me, I said. Let the papers run with it. HOA president authorizes use of force to destroy a century-old flood barrier on private land, while the owner stands in its defense. You think that plays well on local TV national? He blinked. Because I saw the flicker of fear not from the law, not from what was right or wrong, but from something far worse to men like him, bad optics. That was when the contractor crew hesitated. Two of them were already holding back hands on shovels, glancing at each other like the job had started to stink. A third checked his phone and whispered something to the driver. I knew I had seconds to widen the crack. So I reached into my coat and pulled out the flash drive I'd worn around my neck since the night I filmed my testimony. I held it up. This contains every document, every report, every file proving what you're about to do is illegal. And I've sent copies to the county, to the press, and to 5 state offices. Touch that dam, and the lawsuits won't just come from me. They'll come from the Department of Natural Resources, the Historical Preservation Council, and maybe even FEMA, if this turns into a flood zone. I looked straight into Roger's eyes. Is a park really worth all that? He didn't answer. He just turned to Karen. She shrugged. 10 minutes, he muttered to the contractor. Stand down for now. The convoy backed up. The bulldozer's engine sputtered to life, then faded as it retreated to the gravel shoulder across the road. I didn't move until the last truck pulled away. Then I collapsed into a chair I kept beside the gate, heart hammering, legs trembling. My daughter came running from the house, eyes wide, phone in hand. I filmed the whole thing, she said, breathless, every word. I exhaled a laugh. You always were good at catching the truth. She grinned and sat beside me. They're not done, are they? No, I said. They'll wait until the hearing, maybe longer. But they'll be back. That night I couldn't sleep. I paced the length of the dam again, flashlight beam tracing the seams in the stone. I imagined my father doing the same, maybe years ago, maybe when I was still too young to know why he disappeared into the trees some nights. I touched the eastern spillway where water trickled like veins down stone. It had held for a century. But one misguided backhoe could break it in minutes, and the weather, the real threat, was closing in. Dark clouds rolled in from the northwest. I checked the radar. A storm front stalled over the next county, expected to dump 2 inches overnight. Maybe more. The dam could hold, but only if they left it alone. That's when I saw the lights. Faint. Flashing. Just at the edge of the tree line near the southern bank. Not construction lights too low. Flashlights. I crept forward, staying low, heart thudding again. I turned off the trail cams for the day after the confrontation, but I still had one backup. I crouched behind a boulder and listened. Voices, 2, maybe 3. They weren't kids. These were grown men. Contractors, or worse, board members. One was saying, "We do it now, no one can stop us. Rain hits tomorrow, it'll look like the dam just gave way." And just like that, the real plan hit me. It was never about permits. Never about timing. They were going to sabotage it and claim nature took its course. And if they succeeded, the town would be underwater by morning. I didn't move. The words echoed in my ears. It'll look like the dam just gave way. A quiet sentence spoken in the dark but loud enough to drown an entire town. My knuckles went white around the flashlight I hadn't dared to turn on. I stayed hidden behind the boulder, trying to make out their shapes, their faces, anything. 2 men. One held a shovel. The other had a bolt cutter slung over his shoulder and a duffel bag at his feet. I knew that posture, nervous, rushed, reckless. I'd seen it in combat zones. It was the stance of men who knew what they were doing was wrong, but believed in the lie that the end justified the means. They moved fast, too fast. One of them headed toward the sluice gate on the south end, the oldest part of the dam, where the original drainage system had been modified with a manual valve back in the 1960s. My father taught me how to open and close it with a giant iron key the size of a sledgehammer. but it hadn't been opened in decades. I'd welded the wheel shut after a minor leak in 2003. It wasn't meant to be touched, and yet here they were trying to breach it in the dead of night. I stepped forward, not to confront, not yet. To record. Phone in hand, I hit record and whispered into the camera. My voice was low hoarse, but clear. Time 10:41 p.m. Location, south side of Grant Family Dam. 2 men presumed hired by HOA attempting unauthorized access to water control mechanism. Sabotage in progress. The one with the bolt cutters set to work on the rusted lock. It snapped, then clattered against the stone. The sound was too loud for comfort, and it made them both pause, looking over their shoulders. I dropped lower behind a pile of broken masonry I'd set aside for repairs. Then the digging started. They weren't opening the sluice gate. They were compromising the foundation. They were shoveling out soil and rocks along the spillway's flank just beneath the structural footing. Just enough maybe to cause it to sag under the weight of the coming rain. They didn't have to blow it up or tear it down. They just had to weaken it. Let gravity do the rest. And then pretend it was nature's fault. I couldn't let that happen. I sent the video to 3 people in quick succession, Ruthie Thomas Kellerman at the city office, and my daughter upstairs. Then I hit live stream and pointed the camera back at them. That was the part that finally got their attention. When I stepped out, flashlight on, phone raised like a badge, and said, "Hope you boys smiled for the camera. You're live, and this is all going to the sheriff." They froze. For a split second, I saw genuine panic, the kind that made people flee or fight. One of them dropped his shovel. The other ran. I didn't chase them. I wasn't here to play hero. I walked straight to the damaged section and dropped to my knees. Water was already seeping through the loosened stones like veins cracking open. And the sky, dear God, the sky started to open up. It was like the clouds had been waiting for that moment. Thunder cracked over the hills, a dry, sharp pop that sent vibrations through the stone beneath me. Then came the first drops, slow, heavy, and cold. By the time I got the sandbags from the shed, it was already too late. I worked by flashlight and instinct, piling, packing, shoving stones back where they didn't want to go. Mud sloshed under my knees. My clothes were soaked, hands blistered. I slipped twice. My leg went into the water once and nearly didn't come back out. But I kept going, because if that wall gave way, the water in the upper reservoir would surge down through the ravine and into town, and every cottage, cul-de-sac, and cobblestone street in that picture-perfect historic neighborhood would be under 6 feet of floodwater by morning. I called 911, told them everything. Then I called Ruthie. "Get a goddamn judge," I shouted over the storm. I caught them. On camera. They tried to breach it. "I need an injunction tonight." "I'm on it," she said. No hesitation, no panic, just purpose. By 11:30, the rain had become a wall. It wasn't a storm, it was a deluge. The kind of weather that eats earth. I set up the trail cams again, aiming them at the damaged section, and then ran up the hill to the emergency valve shack. The old wheel was rusted stiff, but I threw everything I had into it. It groaned, screeched, and finally gave an inch. 1 inch was enough. The spillway opened slightly, just enough to relieve the pressure. I watched as the water surged out in a controlled arc, slicing through the mud and grass below, but avoiding the weak side. Then came the noise I'll never forget. A low moaning crack, not thunder, not wind, but stone under stress. The southeast flank was shifting. I bolted down the hill boots, sliding in the muck, and grabbed the final row of sandbags. My daughter appeared out of the shadows, barefoot, drenched, scared out of her mind. "Dad," she screamed, "you're gonna get swept." "Help me," I said. No hesitation. We worked side by side, dropping bags into place, her hands shaking but determined. I could barely see her through the rain, but I could feel her will matching mine. And then it happened. The hillside trembled but held. The dam didn't break. The water kept rising, but so did we. By 1:00 a.m., the sheriff arrived. 2 deputies and 1 city engineer. Ruthie somehow showed up 10 minutes later, heels in one hand, court papers in the other, soaked to her knees. "Emergency injunction is signed," she said. "HOA is prohibited from any further action on this property, pending full review." She looked around, taking in the chaos, the mud, the sandbags, the shovels, the flashlights duct-taped to fence posts. "You held it," she whispered. "Barely," I said, "but barely's enough." At sunrise, I stood on the crest of the dam, staring down at the valley below. The town was safe. The water had crested but not breached. But the evidence, the damage, the photos, the footage, the mud on my daughter's arms, it all told a story. A story that was just beginning to unfold. Because now finally people would have to listen. To the truth. To the land. To the storm that could have drowned them all. At 6:04 a.m., the phone started buzzing. By 6:09, it hadn't stopped. Missed calls, voicemails, notifications from every direction, HOA hotline, city hall, local news outlets, even the school board, all of them calling, not because they cared about what nearly happened, but because the water had come within inches of swallowing their curated little world. But it didn't, because I stopped it. And now they wanted answers. The first call I answered was from Roger Carlyle himself. His voice was raw, strained, stripped of the smug confidence he'd worn like a second skin. "Miles, listen," he started, the words tumbling like he'd rehearsed them in panic. "There's been some confusion. We need to meet, today, in person." I almost laughed. Confusion. That's what he called a criminal act of sabotage. I held the phone in silence long enough that he stammered to fill it. "I mean, we all appreciate your quick thinking last night. The HOA board's prepared to issue a formal statement acknowledging." I cut him off. "Don't say another word, Roger. You're being recorded. Everything you say from here on is going to end up in court." Click. I had better things to do than entertain weak apologies and PR band-aids. The local news van arrived before 7:00 a.m., tires spinning on my soaked driveway. Out jumped a 20-something cameraman and a middle-aged reporter with damp mascara and the hungry gleam of a woman who just smelled a story worth leading the 6 o'clock news. She introduced herself as Melanie from Channel 8. "We've been following the HOA redevelopment story," she said breathlessly. "We heard there was an incident last night." I didn't answer. Instead, I handed her a flash drive. "Everything you need is in here. Video footage, photos, a timeline, eyewitness statements, sabotage us attempt, illegal construction activity, violation of private property rights, emergency engineering reports, the works." She blinked. "You're saying—" "I'm not saying anything off record. You want a quote? You can roll now." The cameraman didn't need a second invitation. The red light came on, and I spoke. I didn't rage, I didn't cry, I didn't grandstand. I simply told the truth. About the dam, about the history, about the family legacy, about the night two men with bolt cutters and shovels tried to stage a failure, about how they nearly drowned a town for the sake of a park bench and a donor plaque, about how my daughter and I, with nothing but sandbags, instinct, and generational knowledge, stopped what their arrogance nearly unleashed. Sometimes I said into the lens, the things we think are old and ugly are the only things keeping us alive. By 10 a.m., the town was buzzing. Not just online in the streets. The footage had gone viral locally. The sheriff's department had issued a statement confirming an active investigation into alleged malicious interference with public safety infrastructure. Roger Carlyle was no longer returning calls. Karen had deactivated her Facebook account. Neighbors who hadn't looked me in the eye in years were now walking up my driveway with muffins and Tupperware casseroles like food could erase their silence. I didn't hold it against them. People are sheep until the wolf's at their door. A city engineer stopped by around noon, a lanky woman named Paula with eyes that missed nothing and a backpack full of instruments. "We pulled your father's old floodplain diagrams from the archive," she said. "Turns out they're more accurate than anything we've modeled in the last 20 years. She surveyed the dam in silence for a while, then turned to me. If that sabotage had worked, the southern ridge would have collapsed. The old town center, gone. "I know," I said quietly. "You shouldn't have had to carry this alone." "I didn't," I said, glancing toward the house. My daughter was asleep on the couch, mud still on her jeans, hair damp from last night's storm. That afternoon, Ruthie called. "Just got out of a meeting with the city attorney," she said. "They're opening a full inquiry into the HOA board. Roger's being investigated for abuse of authority and unlawful construction authorization. And the men who did the damage, one's already confessed, claimed he thought it was an authorized routine drainage job. But we've got the texts, the call logs. It's airtight." She paused. "And we won the injunction, permanently. They can't touch a single stone unless you sign off in writing." I didn't answer right away. Because I was staring at the dam, the cracks we patched the marks where the shovels hit the camera, still recording just in case someone got bold again. It was still standing. So was I. That evening, the town council held an emergency meeting. I didn't plan on attending, but I went anyway. I stood in the back of the room, arms crossed, listening as the council president read the motion aloud. An immediate freeze on all HOA-initiated projects pending external review suspension of Board President Roger Carlile and appointment of an interim oversight panel. Someone behind me whispered, "Is that him?" "That's the guy who saved the dam." I didn't turn around. The vote passed unanimously, and when I stepped outside into the night air, cool and damp and rich, with the smell of pine and mud, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. Not victory, not yet, but something like it. A reporter chased me to the parking lot. "Mr. Grant, now that the board's been suspended, what's next for you for the dam?" I stopped and looked at her. "I'll tell you what's next," I said. "We rebuild. But not the way they would have. We don't erase history. We honor it. We restore what matters, and we teach our kids why it mattered in the first place." Then I walked away, because there was still work to be done, and I wasn't going to let a single drop of this moment go to waste. The courthouse smelled like old wood and quiet rage. You'd think, after everything, the sabotage, the storm, the public outrage, the HOA would have backed down. But Roger Carlile wasn't wired that way. Even with half the town calling for his resignation and the other half canceling their dues in protest, he doubled down. His strategy was simple: paint himself as the victim. A concerned citizen trying to improve the community who got caught in a miscommunication. The sabotage, a rogue contractor. The unauthorized demolition schedule, a clerical mix-up. The dam, a dangerous relic. My strategy was simpler: tell the truth, with evidence. We filed a civil suit against the HOA, and Roger personally trespassing endangerment, attempted destruction of private property, and willful negligence with potential loss of life. Ruthie, my lawyer, told me she hadn't felt this confident walking into a courtroom in over a decade. But she also warned me, people like Roger, they don't go down easy. They claw, they smear, they throw mud, and call it justice. The trial started on a Tuesday. The courtroom was packed, neighbors, reporters, a few city officials trying to save face. I spotted Karen in the second row wearing sunglasses indoors like that would make her invisible. She couldn't even meet my eyes. Roger sat at the defense table in a tailored navy suit, fidgeting with his tie like a noose he hadn't noticed tightening yet. The judge was a woman named Evelyn Marsh, sharp as a scalpel and twice as precise. She didn't care about politics. She cared about procedure, which meant we had a chance. Ruthie opened strong. She showed the jury the footage, grainy night vision clips of the two saboteurs digging at the dam's foundation, the timestamp matching the storm's arrival almost to the minute. She walked them through the city maps, the deed records, the structural engineering reports, everything proving that the dam was both privately owned and structurally sound before the attack. She even brought in Ed Matheson, the old friend turned expert witness, who testified with gravel in his voice and no sympathy for fools. This wasn't neglect, he said, voice steady. It was malice. That dam was fine. They wanted it gone for politics and optics, and they nearly drowned a town to do it. Roger's defense attorney tried to spin it all. He waved a lot of papers, talked about community consensus and lack of formal resistance during public planning phases. He tried to cast me as a cranky recluse stuck in the past, unwilling to change for the good of the neighborhood. I didn't flinch. When I took the stand, I told them what happened in plain language. No theatrics, no manipulation, just the truth. How I'd watched men in the dark try to destroy what generations had built. How I'd fought off rising floodwaters with my daughter by my side. How the HOA knew what they were doing because I told them over and over again, and how they chose to ignore it. I could see the jury leaning forward, watching me the way people watch a dam about to break. I closed with this. They thought I was the only one standing in their way. But the truth is, every stone in that dam was standing with me. Every year, it held every season it survived. Every storm it swallowed, those were my witnesses. And they won't be silenced just because someone wants prettier walking trails. The verdict came 2 days later. Liability confirmed, trespassing proven. Attempted destruction of private property resulting in public endangerment, guilty. The court ordered the HOA to pay full damages, including emergency repairs, attorney fees, and compensation for emotional distress. Roger Carlile was removed permanently from the board and barred from holding any leadership position in any HOA across the state. But the best part, the judge ordered that the dam be officially designated as a historic structure protected under state conservation law. They couldn't touch it again, ever. After the ruling, I stepped outside into a warm spring afternoon. There were reporters waiting, but I ignored them. My daughter ran up, arms around my waist, laughing through tears. Ruthie stood a few steps behind, smiling like a woman who'd just pulled a thorn from a lion's paw and lived to tell about it. "You did it," my daughter said. "No," I told her. "We did." The courthouse doors opened behind us, and for a second I looked back. Roger was standing in the doorway, alone. His tie was loosened now, his face pale, his hands empty. For once, he had nothing to say. No speech, no smile, no spin. Just silence. And that, more than the verdict, felt like justice. A few weeks later, the new interim board invited me to a town meeting. Not to argue. To thank me. They wanted to make things right. Talk about real repairs, proper community input. Maybe even create a historical education trail that included the dam. I went. Not because I wanted validation, but because I wanted to look every person in that room in the eye and make sure they understood one thing. History matters. Stewardship matters. And sometimes, protecting something old and weathered is the bravest, most revolutionary act you can commit. When the meeting ended, a small boy came up to me, maybe 9 or 10, carrying a science fair trifold with photos of the dam and my name printed under the title, "The Man Who Saved Our Town." He looked up at me nervous. "Can you sign it?" I did, because that dam didn't just hold back water. It held back the flood of forgetting, and I wasn't going to let a single drop wash that away. You'd think winning in court would feel like the end of it. The gavel comes down. The papers get stamped, and the villains walk out with their heads hung low. You ride off into the sunset with your daughter beside you and a small-town legacy intact. But life doesn't close its stories that neatly. The dam still stood, but the damage lingered not in stone but in people. Some neighbors still couldn't look me in the eye. Some board members who hadn't been directly involved in the sabotage tried to quietly return to normal, like they hadn't voted yes to the plan that almost destroyed our town. Roger Carlyle disappeared from public view. Sold his house within the month. Word around town was he'd moved to a gated community out west, one without a dam in sight. Karen stayed. She resigned from the board and joined a yoga studio 2 towns over. I saw her once at the post office, standing 3 people ahead of me, in line, shoulders stiff, avoiding eye contact like it was a bear trap. I didn't hate her. Hate's a flood of its own, and I'd already had enough of that. So when the new interim board asked if I'd be willing to consult on restoration efforts around the dam, I said yes. Not because I trusted them, not yet, but because I believed in the land. And if I didn't show up to protect it again, who would? The new board president was a man named Leo Tran, a structural engineer who had moved to town just 6 months before the storm. He'd voted against the beautification project from the start, not because he knew me, but because the plan didn't make sense. The calculations were wrong, he told me over coffee the first time we met. And when calculations are wrong, consequences show up. I liked him immediately. He walked the dam with me, that spring clipboard in hand, rubber boots caked in mud, listening more than talking. He asked smart questions and didn't flinch at the honest answers. I showed him where the soil had buckled, where the stone had shifted under stress, where the sabotage nearly broke the foundation. We talked repairs, reinforcement, education, and legacy. "Would you be open," he asked, "to having the dam named officially something for the maps?" I hesitated. "Only if it's about the people who built it, not me." He nodded. "What about the Grant Legacy Dam?" I laughed, a little dramatic. "It's earned." In the months that followed, something strange happened. People started showing up. Scouts, school groups, city officials, even tourists. They wanted to see the dam. The one from the news, the one that held back a storm. The one a father and daughter saved in the middle of the night. And with them came change. Volunteers helped clear the trails around the reservoir. The town applied for and received a state preservation grant for historical infrastructure. A local high school science teacher asked if she could bring her environmental science class out once a month to study the watershed. A retired botanist started a native plant garden at the base of the dam, explaining to kids how roots hold the earth the way families hold each other. My daughter, who had once begged me to sell the land and move somewhere normal, started tagging along on weekends. She took photos, asked questions, even started a blog. Dams Don't Cry. She wrote about the night of the storm, about fear and strength, and how sometimes justice doesn't look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like remembering. We hosted our first community day at the dam that summer. Leo brought donuts. Someone set up a canopy. A local band played covers under the trees. There was a booth with laminated copies of the original blueprints and a timeline of the dam's construction. I stood off to the side watching people walk the trail point. At the spillway, lean in to read the plaques. They didn't see an ugly relic anymore. They saw something that had survived. Like them. Like me. At one point, a little girl ran up wide-eyed and barefoot, holding a crumpled coloring page of the dam. "Are you the man who lives in the dam house?" I smiled. "Close enough. My mom said you stopped the flood, that you made the water listen." I knelt to her level. "I didn't make it listen," I said. "I just remembered what it needed." She beamed, then ran off toward the lemonade table. That night, as the sun dipped behind the hills, my daughter and I sat on the porch, a breeze coming off the water, the hum of cicadas settling like music. "You know, she said I used to hate this place." I chuckled. "Yeah, you told me," loudly. "But now, I get it. I think I needed to see what it meant. Not just to you, to everyone." I looked out at the dam. The repaired sections gleamed faintly in the twilight, stronger now, wiser maybe. "Justice isn't always about someone losing," I said. "Sometimes it's about something lasting." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I'm glad it lasted. So am I." And we sat there quiet until the stars came out. The water kept flowing. The dam kept holding. And for the first time in a long time, so did I. The morning they installed the new sign, I stood alone at the edge of the dam, watching the crew bolt it into the stone. It was simple. No gold plaques, no grand speeches. Just steel letters etched into dark granite, weatherproof and understated. Grant Legacy Dam. Established 1917, reaffirmed 2025. In honor of those who hold the line. I didn't ask for that last part. That was my daughter's doing. She'd submitted it to the preservation board without telling me. Said she wanted people to know it wasn't just the dam that stood during the storm, it was the idea behind it. That some things are worth protecting, not because they're perfect, but because they've endured. I thought about my father when I read those words. How he used to stand right where I was, now arms crossed, surveying the water like it was a living thing. How he taught me not to fear it, but to understand it. How his voice echoed in my head when the rain started to fall that night, and I had to make a choice. I think he would have been proud. Not of the sign, not even of the court victory, but of what came after. Over the summer, we rebuilt what had been damaged. Not just stone and soil, but trust. The new community board created a historical education initiative centered around the dam. Kids from the local middle school painted murals on the pump house. Local historians held storytelling nights under lantern light, reading letters from the dam's earliest years. People didn't just visit the dam anymore. They learned from it. We installed a rain gauge, a flow meter, and a permanent monitoring system with real-time data shared online. A small weather station sat beside the shed, now built with the help of a few college interns from the State University's Environmental Engineering Department. Funny how people want to help when you finally make them see. Even the city, which once ignored our warnings, allocated funds for better upstream runoff controls and storm drain upgrades. Turns out it's easier to respect infrastructure when you've nearly watched it collapse. My daughter spent most of her weekends at the dam that fall. Sometimes alone, sometimes with friends, sometimes with a GoPro strapped to her head and a laptop open beside her. She ran workshops for kids, taught them how to measure water turbidity with mason jars and strips of paper. She showed them how erosion worked with buckets of dirt and old milk cartons. She didn't tell them what happened that night. Not directly. But it lived in the way she moved. In the careful way she stepped along the edge of the water. In the way she reminded the kids gently that everything's connected. Her blog grew into something bigger. Local news outlets started referencing her posts. Then regional ones. Then a podcast asked her to speak. She titled her first episode, "How to Keep What Matters from Washing Away." I listened to it one night alone in the kitchen. I didn't cry, but my hands shook when she described watching me in the rain stacking sandbags with shaking fingers and mud in my eyes. He wasn't saving a dam, she said. He was saving a story. She got that part right. The HOA never fully recovered. After Roger's resignation, 2 more board members stepped down quietly. The interim team turned over elections to the residents, and for the first time in years, people actually showed up. Not just to vote, but to care. They started asking questions, reading the fine print, looking beyond the newsletters and landscaping rules to the people in the neighborhood. That was the real shift. Not just policy, but perspective. Karen eventually showed up to one of the dam events. She didn't say much, just lingered at the edge of the crowd, hands tucked into her sleeves, sunglasses pushed up into her hair. When our eyes met, she walked over. "I was wrong," she said quietly. I nodded. "You almost cost this town everything I said, not cruelly, just plainly. But you didn't. That still matters." She looked down. "I thought I was doing the right thing. Beautification, safety. I never imagined." "You didn't listen," I said. "You looked at something old and assumed it was useless." She nodded. "I've done a lot of assuming." We stood there in silence for a while. Then she asked if she could volunteer with the kids' garden restoration. I said yes, because this place wasn't about grudges. It was about resilience. Winter came late that year, but when it did, it came softly. No floods, no sabotage. Just quiet snow, blanketing the dam, the trail, the hill. I walked at daily boots, crunching breath, fogging the air clean in a way only cold can make it. My daughter joined me some mornings. We didn't always talk. We didn't need to. One morning, she looked out at the frozen surface of the reservoir and said, "You think it'll still be here in another 100 years?" I looked at the dam, at the marks worn into its stones, at the sandbags now removed and repurposed into planters, at the new families walking the trail where bulldozers once parked. "If people remember," I said, "then yes." She nodded. "Then let's make sure they do." There was a letter in the mailbox when we got back. From the governor's office. The dam had been nominated and approved for inclusion in the State Register of Historic Places. There'd be a ceremony in the spring. A plaque. A speech. I didn't care much for the pomp, but I knew what it meant. It meant no one could ever tear it down again. Not a board. Not a storm. Not time. I stood on the dam that evening, watching the sun slide behind the hills. The sky turned the color of iron, cooling in a forge, dark and burning at once. The wind whispered over the water, calm now, but always moving. Always waiting. Just like the dam. Just like me. And I realized something I hadn't admitted before. This wasn't just about my father's legacy. It was mine now, too. Not because I built it, but because I kept it. Because I chose to stay when it would have been easier to leave. Because I learned how to hold the line with law, with truth, with love. Because I showed my daughter how. That's what mattered in the end. Not the storm. Not the board. But the dam that didn't break. And the story that never sank.